The morning I came home to find my road paved without my permission, Karen Voss was already waiting with an invoice. $120,847. Itemized. Professional letterhead. At the bottom, highlighted in yellow, Cole Property Share of Improvement Cost, $47,000. Payment due, 30 days. She'd destroyed my road and sent me a bill for it. Cole's Mill Road has been in my family since 1947. My grandfather built it, 1.2 miles of packed limestone from the county highway to his farmhouse. When Harmon's Bluff was developed in 1978, they needed access. My father offered it on specific terms, a licensed use agreement, $1,200 a year, renewable every January. They signed it for 43 consecutive years. Karen Voss became HOA president in 2017. In January 2022, she stopped signing. No call, no letter, just silence. For 3 years I waited. And she told the community she was working on acquiring the road permanently. What she was actually doing, incorporating her brother's paving company, planning an overnight construction project, and preparing that invoice. I spent 31 years as a civil engineer for the state of Tennessee. I've designed roads, permitted them, reviewed hundreds of millions of dollars in road construction. I know exactly what it takes to build one legally. Karen had no land disturbance permit, no authorization from me, no easement. She had 3 pieces of heavy equipment and the assumption that I'd accept what I was given. I locked the gate the next morning. All 99 households took the 4.2-mile detour for 4 months. Karen lost her real estate license, was indicted on 2 counts of criminal fraud, and listed her house for sale to partially cover a $382,800 civil judgment. The road is still mine. It always was. My grandfather's survey marker is exactly where he put it in 1947. But first, drop your location in the comments and don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more interesting stories like this. I heard it before I understood what it was. Heavy equipment. The low diesel groan of something large working close to the property. I lay in bed for a moment in the gray early light of a Friday morning in October, listening, placing the sound. It was coming from the east side of the property, the road side. I checked the clock, 6:14 a.m. I'd gone to bed Thursday night with my road intact. I'd driven it at 8 p.m. coming back from the hardware store in town, the same gravel road my father had built in 1947, at the same 1.2 miles of packed limestone surface that had served this land for 78 years, rutted in places from the summer's dry heat, needing fresh gravel at the north end where the drainage had been working against it, but intact. Present. Mine. I pulled on jeans and boots and walked out the back door. What I found at the edge of my property stopped me completely. 3 pieces of heavy equipment, an excavator, a skid steer, and a compaction roller, were working the length of Cole's Mill Road. They'd already torn up the first 400 yards of gravel surface, the limestone base scraped down to bare subgrade. Behind them, a paving crew was laying hot mix asphalt. A full-width mat, professional grade, the kind of work you'd see on a county highway project. New concrete curbing had already been poured along the first 200 yards. Perfectly formed, clearly done the night before, during darkness, to get ahead of the asphalt work. And at the entrance to the road, at the survey marker my father had set in 1947, the granite post that had stood at the boundary of Cole family land for longer than most of these houses had existed, there was a sign, metal post, professional fabrication, dark green with white lettering, Harmon's Bluff Community Road, HOA maintained. I stood at the edge of what used to be my gravel road and looked at the equipment, the fresh asphalt, the curbing, and the sign claiming my property as community infrastructure. I counted 7 workers. None of them looked at me. I walked back inside and put on coffee. My name is Raymond Cole. I'm 58 years old. I spent 31 years as a civil engineer for the state of Tennessee before I retired in 2019. I've designed roads, I've permitted roads, I've reviewed road construction projects worth hundreds of millions of dollars and signed off on them or rejected them based on whether the engineering was sound and the documentation was clean. I know exactly what it takes to build a road. I also know exactly what it takes to build one legally. You need a land disturbance permit from the county. You need the landowner's written authorization. If you're building on someone else's property, you need a recorded easement or a signed construction agreement. 3 pieces of equipment working my private road at 6 a.m. on a Friday morning had none of those things. I knew that before my coffee finished brewing. Coles Mill Road has been in my family since 1947. When my grandfather Raymond Sr. purchased 47 acres in what would eventually become Harmon's Bluff, Tennessee. He built the road himself, a limestone gravel surface running 1.2 miles from the county highway at the east end of the property to the western boundary where his farmhouse stood. When the Harmon's Bluff residential development was platted in 1978, the developer had approached my father about road access. The community needed Coles Mill Road. It was the most direct route from the county highway to the development, significantly shorter than the alternative fire access road to the south. My father had agreed, on specific terms, a licensed use agreement, annual renewal, $1,200 per year for the right to use Coles Mill Road for residential access, renewable each January, non-transferable, and explicitly not an easement. The agreement contained language put there by my father's attorney stating that this license created no permanent right of access and no ownership interest in the road or the underlying land. That agreement had been signed every year from 1978 through 2021, 43 consecutive years of annual renewals. The HOA had never missed one, until Karen Voss became president. Karen had been elected HOA president in 2017. I'd met her twice in passing, once at a community event I'd attended after my father died, once when she'd stopped by the property to discuss a fencing question near the road boundary. She was organized, confident, the kind of person who ran meetings efficiently and moved agendas forward. She was also, I'd observed in those two brief interactions, the kind of person who believed that confidence was a substitute for documentation. In January 2022, the renewal notice for the licensed use agreement had gone out as usual. David Park's firm in Nashville, which had handled the Cole family's property matters for 20 years, sent it every December for signature and return by January 15th. It came back unsigned. David had followed up. Karen had responded that the HOA was reviewing the road access situation and would be in touch. She never was. David had sent certified letters in February and March of 2022. No response. He'd flagged it to me in April. My position at the time, the license had lapsed. The HOA was technically in unlicensed use of my road, but I wasn't ready to act on it immediately. I'd been dealing with my father's estate, a property tax dispute, and the early work of the retirement life I'd just begun. I told David to document it and wait. I'd been patient for 3 years. Karen Voss had apparently mistaken my patience for ignorance. I finished my coffee and walked back out to the road. The excavator had moved another 150 yards north. The asphalt mat was going down smoothly behind it. A clean, professional surface, genuinely good work from a technical standpoint. I could see that the contractor had done their subgrade prep correctly, had the right base depth, was running the roller passes at the right intervals. Whoever Karen had hired knew what they were doing. They just didn't know whose land they were doing it on. A man in a yellow safety vest detached from the crew and walked toward me. Project superintendent, by his bearing, mid-40s, clipboard. We have a work order from the Harmons. I'll get it right away. He looked at his clipboard. I'm sorry, but I can't find a work order for the Harmons. That's okay. I'll just go to the Harmons and see if they have a work order for me. He looked at his clipboard. I'm sorry, but I can't find a work order for the Harmons. That's okay. I'll just go to the Harmons and see if they have a work order for me. He looked at his clipboard. I'm sorry, but I can't find a work order for the Harmons. That's okay. I'll just go to the Harmons and see if they have a work order for me. He looked at his clipboard. I'm sorry, but I can't find a work order for the Harmons. That's okay. I'll just go to the Harmons and see if they have a work order for me. He looked at his clipboard. I'm sorry, but I can't find a work order for the Harmons. That's okay. I'll just go to the Harmons and see if they have a work order for me. He looked at his clipboard. I'm sorry, but I can't find a work order for the Harmons. That's okay. I'll just go to the Harmons and see if they have a work order for me. He looked at his clipboard. I'm sorry, but I can't find a work order for the Harmons. That's okay. I'll just go to the Harmons and see if they have a work order for me. He looked at his clipboard. I'm sorry, but I can't find a work order for the Harmons. That's okay. I'll just go to the Harmons and see if they have a work order for me. He looked at his clipboard. I'm sorry, but I can't find a work order for the Harmons. That's okay. I'll just go to the Harmons and see if they have a work order for me. He looked at his clipboard. I'm sorry, but I can't find a work order for the Harmons. That's okay. I'll just go to the Harmons and see if they have a work order for me. He looked at his clipboard. I'm sorry, but I can't find a work order for the Harmons. That's okay. I'll just... We have a work order from the Harmons Bluff Community Association, Road Improvement Project. You should have received notification. I didn't receive notification because no one asked my permission. This road is deeded to my family. It has been since 1947. I looked at the fresh asphalt. Do you have a land disturbance permit for this project? He flipped through papers on the clipboard. The HOA handles the permitting. That's not my end. I'd suggest you call your contact at the HOA and ask them to produce a land disturbance permit, a signed construction authorization from the property owner, and a recorded easement or valid license agreement. Before you lay any more asphalt. He looked at me steadily. Sir, I have a signed work order. Signed by Karen Voss? Yes. Karen Voss doesn't own this road. I do. I reached into my shirt pocket and produced a folded document, the one-page summary of the Coles Mill Road deed that David's office had prepared for me 2 years ago when I'd anticipated this conversation might eventually happen. I handed it to him. That's a summary of the recorded deed. The full document is at the Robertson County Register of Deeds. I'd recommend your company's legal counsel review it today. He looked at the document, then at the road, then back at me. I'm going to need to make a call. That's a good idea. I walked back to the house. Karen arrived at 9:30 a.m. She drove a white SUV and parked at the road entrance. It's next to the HOA sign on my survey marker. She was dressed for a business meeting, slacks, a blazer, the presentation of someone who'd prepared for a conversation she expected to control. She walked toward me with the kind of confidence that made me think she'd rehearsed this. Raymond, she extended her hand. I know this looks sudden. I should have communicated better about the timeline. I shook her hand, said nothing. The board voted in August to upgrade Coles Mill Road as part of our 5-year capital improvement plan. The road's been deteriorating for years. You know that. It needs paving. We've been planning this for 18 months and we finally had the budget to execute. The road was mine to maintain or not maintain as I chose. The road serves the entire community. 99 households depend on it. The HOA has a responsibility. The HOA had a licensed use agreement that expired in January 2022 because you didn't renew it. You've been using my private road for 3 years without a valid license. I kept my voice even. And you've now destroyed the surface of my private road and replaced it with infrastructure you're claiming as community property, on my land. Karen reached into her blazer pocket and produced an envelope. The board authorized me to deliver this. I opened it. An invoice, HOA letterhead, itemized line items for road preparation, base work, asphalt, curbing, drainage improvements, and project management. Total $120,847. At the bottom, highlighted, Cole Property Share of Improvement Cost, $47,000. Payment due 30 days. I read it twice. Karen had destroyed my road and sent me a bill for her portion of doing it. And I looked at the invoice for a long moment. I looked at the HOA sign on my survey marker. I looked at the fresh asphalt on my road, still warm, the crew working north toward the second gate post. Karen, I said, how long have you been telling the community you were going to acquire this road? Something moved across her face. Not much. A small tightening around the eyes. The board has been exploring long-term access options. 3 years? 4? We've been in discussions. With whom? Not with me. David Park's office sent renewal notices in 2022. You didn't respond. That's the last communication my attorney's office has from the HOA. I folded the invoice and put it in my pocket. You didn't acquire this road, Karen. You don't own it. You've never owned it. And what you did last night is going to take some time to fully understand. She looked at me with the expression of a woman recalibrating. What does that mean? It means I'm going inside to call my attorney. I turned and walked back to the house. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't threaten. I didn't tell her what was coming because I didn't need to. Karen Voss had made her move at 6 a.m. with 3 pieces of heavy equipment and a prefabricated sign. She'd done it believing that a retired engineer living alone on 47 acres in Robertson County, Tennessee, would look at the situation and conclude that fighting it was harder than accepting it. She'd miscalculated the man and the deed. I called David Park at 10:15 a.m. David, they paved the road. A pause. They paved it. The whole thing. Overnight, asphalt, curbing, HOA signage. And they sent me a $47,000 invoice for my share. Another pause. Longer this time. Raymond, I need you to photograph everything before they get any further. Already done. GPS stamped, time stamped. I went out at first light. Good. Don't touch the sign. Don't engage the crew again. I'm filing a cease and desist before noon, and I'm pulling the permit records from Robertson County this afternoon. There won't be a permit. I know, that's the point. I heard him typing. Raymond, this is the cleanest trespass and destruction of private property case I've seen in 20 years. The deed chain is perfect. The license lapse is documented. The fact that she sent you an invoice is... He stopped. That invoice is extraordinary. She highlighted my share. She highlighted your share? He laughed. Not with humor exactly, but with the specific energy of an attorney who's just been handed everything he needs. Okay, I'm on it. Don't pay the invoice. David. Right. Sorry. I set the phone down and walked to the window. Outside, the crew was still working north. The asphalt surface was clean and dark in the October light. The HOA sign was still on my survey marker. My family had owned this road since 1947. Karen Voss had spent $120,000 of her neighbor's money paving it overnight. She'd sent me a bill. She'd put her sign on my grandfather's survey marker. She had no idea what was coming. Neither did the 99 families who, in approximately 72 hours, were going to wake up and find 2 locked steel gates across the only road that connected their homes to the rest of Robertson County, Tennessee. David Park had been my family's property attorney for 20 years. Yet he'd handled my father's estate in 2009. He'd filed the deed transfer that put Coles Mill Road and all 47 acres into my name. He'd drafted the licensed use agreement renewals every December for the 13 years I'd been the owner of record. And he'd documented, carefully and without drama, every step of the HOA's failure to renew beginning in January 2022. David was not a dramatic man. He was methodical, thorough. The kind of attorney who returned calls the same day, kept files in perfect order, and delivered difficult news in plain language without softening it into ambiguity. When he called me back at 4:30 p.m. on that Friday afternoon, his voice had the specific quality of someone who has spent 6 hours reviewing documents and found exactly what he expected to find, and then something better. The deed chain is clean, he said. Cleaner than clean. Your grandfather filed the original in Robertson County in March 1947. Chain of title is unbroken. Grandfather to your father in 1971, father to you in 2009. No gaps, no clouds, no competing claims. Coles Mill Road has been Cole family property for 78 years. I know. I want you to understand the full picture of what that means for Karen's position. She can't argue title. She can't argue color of title. She can't argue anything that touches ownership because the ownership is documented, recorded, and unambiguous. What about her licensed use argument? She told me the HOA has maintained the road for 20 years. That's where it gets interesting. I heard paper moving. I pulled all 43 license agreements from our files going back to 1978. Now, every one of them contains the same provision. Paragraph 4, Section B. I want to read it to you exactly. Go ahead. This agreement constitutes a license for use only and creates no easement, prescriptive right, ownership interest, or permanent right of access in or to Coles Mill Road or the underlying real property. Licensee acknowledges the exclusive ownership of Coles Mill Road by the Cole family and agrees that continued use of said road under this agreement shall not be construed as adverse, hostile, or under a claim of right. He let that sit for a moment. She signed that language. Every HOA president signed it. Karen Voss signed it in 2018, 2019, 2020, and 2021. I set down my coffee. 4 times. 4 times. In her own hand. Acknowledging your family's exclusive ownership, waiving any claim of adverse or hostile use, and explicitly agreeing that use under the license creates no permanent right of access. This was the thing about my father that I'd always admired most. He'd been a farmer and a contractor, not an attorney, but he'd understood something about land that most people learn too late. The document you sign today is the wall that protects you tomorrow. He'd paid his attorney to put those words in the license agreement in 1978, and he'd made sure they stayed in every renewal for the next 43 years. Karen had signed away the HOA's adverse possession claim 4 times. She just hadn't known it. What does adverse possession require in Tennessee? I asked. It was a question I already knew the answer to, but I wanted to hear David say it for the record. Open, notorious, exclusive, and hostile use for 20 years. The critical word is hostile, meaning under a claim of right without the owner's permission. He paused. The license agreement is the exact opposite of hostile use. It's permissive use, explicitly acknowledged, explicitly licensed. You cannot adversely possess property when your use is licensed by the owner. The moment you sign a license agreement, you've admitted the owner owns it. The adverse possession clock doesn't run. It can't run. So 43 years of license agreements means 43 years of the clock not running. Correct. And 4 years of Karen's own signatures specifically waiving any claim of right. He paused. Raymond, I've been a property attorney for 22 years. This is the most thoroughly self-defeating adverse possession claim I've encountered. I almost smiled. File the demand, I said. David filed it the following Monday morning. 3 pages. Robertson County letterhead. Delivered certified mail to Karen Voss personally and to the Harmons Bluff HOA's registered agent. Item 1. Immediate cessation of all construction activity on Coles Mill Road, which is the private property of Raymond Cole as recorded in Robertson County Register of Deeds. Item 2. Immediate removal of all HOA signage installed on Raymond Cole's property, specifically the signs at the east and west termini of Coles Mill Road within 7 days of receipt. Item 3. Full restoration of Coles Mill Road to its prior condition, gravel surface, limestone base, original drainage configuration, at the HOA's sole expense within 45 days. In the alternative, a cash payment of $120,000 representing the replacement value of the destroyed road surface and the cost of restoration. Item 4. Immediate execution and delivery of a new licensed use agreement for the HOA's continued use of Coles Mill Road, retroactive to January 2022 to address the 3-year lapse, at the standard annual rate of $1,200. The letter closed with one paragraph I'd asked David to include specifically. Mr. Cole reserves all rights with respect to the HOA's unlicensed use of his private road since January 2022, and with respect to the criminal trespass and destruction of private property that occurred on or about October 9, 2025. Mr. Cole has not yet determined whether to pursue criminal referral in addition to the civil remedies described above. That last sentence was deliberate, not a threat. A fact. And I hadn't decided yet, but I wanted Karen to understand the full range of the landscape she was standing in. Karen received the demand on Tuesday morning. By Tuesday afternoon, she'd called an emergency board meeting. I know what was said at that meeting because Margaret Okafor, a Harmons Bluff resident who'd introduced herself to me 2 days after the paving incident with an apology and a plate of food, had a friend on the board who gave her a detailed account. Karen's opening position. We have adverse possession rights. We've maintained that road for 20 years. We paved it, we curbed it, we installed drainage. We've put $120,000 into it. That's more than enough to establish our claim. The board had listened. Then the board's vice president, a man named Tom Brierly, had asked the obvious question. Karen, did you consult an attorney before authorizing the paving project? Karen, I consulted with Frank Hartley. Frank Hartley was the HOA's general counsel, a generalist in Clarksville who handled the association's standard disputes. Tom, what did he say? Karen, he said we had a strong position based on long-term use and maintenance. Tom, did he review the license agreements? A pause. He reviewed our use history. Tom, did he review the specific language of the license agreements, the ones Cole's family has been sending us every year since 1978? Another pause. Longer. I'll follow up with him. She followed up the next morning. Then Frank Hartley called David Park's office to request copies of the license agreements, a request that told David everything he needed to know about how thoroughly Karen's own attorney had reviewed the situation before advising her. David sent the full set of 43 agreements by email, with a cover note that quoted paragraph 4, section B, verbatim. Hartley called Karen that afternoon. Margaret's friend on the board told her later that the call lasted 11 minutes, that Karen's end of it, audible to the 2 board members sitting in her living room, moved through several distinct emotional registers before settling into something that sounded like controlled fury. Hartley's conclusion, delivered apparently without softening. The adverse possession claim was not viable. The license agreements defeated it categorically. Yet the HOA had no ownership claim to Coles Mill Road. The paving project had been conducted on private property without authorization. The demand for restoration or cash equivalent was legally sound. Karen, then we'll fight it. Hartley. Karen, on what grounds? Karen, Community necessity. That road is the only practical access to 99 homes. Courts protect community access rights. Hartley. Community access rights derive from easements, recorded agreements, or public road status. You have none of those. You had a license agreement. You let it lapse. The court is going to ask exactly the question I'm asking you. Why didn't you renew it? Karen had no clean answer for that, because the real answer, was that she'd let it lapse deliberately. Yeah, she'd been telling the community for 3 years that she was working on acquiring the road permanently. Renewing the license every year, paying $1,200, and acknowledging Raymond Cole's ownership in writing was inconsistent with the narrative she'd been building. She'd let it lapse because she'd been planning to claim it. She just hadn't accounted for the 43 signed documents that made that claim impossible. She'll fight it, David told me when he called Thursday evening. I know. Hartley's going to try the community necessity angle, implied easement by prior use maybe. Neither will survive a motion to dismiss, but they'll generate delay and legal costs. How long? If she's aggressive, 6 to 8 months of motions before we get to summary judgment. Maybe longer if she finds a more aggressive litigator. I was quiet for a moment. David, the license has been lapsed for 3 years. Correct. She paved my road without permission. Correct. She sent me a $47,000 invoice. Which is still sitting on your kitchen counter, I assume. I put it in the file. Good place for it. It's going to be a useful exhibit. I looked out the window toward the road. The asphalt surface was dark in the evening light. The HOA sign on my survey marker was still there. David had advised me not to touch it until we had the cease and desist order in hand. Documentation first, action second. My father had taught me that. She let the license lapse, I said. She paved my road. She sent me a bill. David waited. Good. A pause on his end. Raymond, what are you thinking? I was thinking about 2 steel gate posts and a heavy gauge lock. I was thinking about 99 households and 1 road. I was thinking about a woman who'd spent 3 years telling her neighbors she was going to acquire a road she'd never owned, and who'd destroyed my property trying to make that story true. I was thinking about how clearly, how absolutely she had handed me everything I needed. I'm thinking about the gate, I said. David was quiet for a moment, then, the license is lapsed. You have the right. I know. 99 households, Raymond. 99 households whose HOA president destroyed my property and sent me a bill. Those are her constituents. That's her decision to answer for. Another pause. I'll have the cease and desist order by Monday, David said. Gate posts take, 2 days to set in concrete? If the weather holds, yes. Then I'd suggest you call your contractor. I already had. The gate posts went in on a Tuesday. I'd hired a fencing contractor out of Springfield, a man named Cal Briggs who'd done work on my property twice before, who understood what I was asking for and why, and who didn't ask unnecessary questions. 2 posts per gate, 4-inch steel pipe, set 3 feet deep in concrete, positioned at the exact survey boundary points at each end of Coles Mill Road. Cal's crew started at 7 a.m. By 9, the concrete was poured and setting. By noon, the gates were hung. Heavy gauge steel tube frames, each one 12 feet wide, hinged to swing inward and lock with a hardened steel crossbar and a padlock I'd purchased specifically for the purpose. I tested both locks twice. Then I put the keys in my shirt pocket and went inside for lunch. The cease and desist order had arrived Monday afternoon as David promised. Robertson County Circuit Court, Judge Patricia Monroe presiding on the emergency motion. The order required the HOA to remove all signage from Raymond Cole's property within 48 hours and to cease all construction activity on Coles Mill Road immediately pending resolution of the ownership and trespass dispute. The construction crew had packed up and left Monday evening. The HOA signs were still on my survey markers Tuesday morning. Karen had not complied with the 48-hour removal order. I photographed both signs with timestamp documentation and sent the images to David. He filed a contempt motion before noon. I locked the gates at 12:47 p.m. Coles Mill Road. My road, deeded to my family since March of 1947, was closed. The first calls started at 6:15 a.m. Wednesday. Most of them went to Karen. I know this because Margaret Okafor, who had become something of an informal community correspondent in my direction, texted me at 7:30 a.m. Raymond, the neighborhood Facebook group has been going since 5 a.m. Karen is not answering her phone. The ones that reached me directly were the ones Karen couldn't intercept. And the first was a woman named Cheryl Fontaine. She'd found my number through the Robertson County property records, which was the right instinct, and told me something about her. Mr. Cole, my name is Cheryl Fontaine. I live at 14 Harmons Bluff Drive. I have a cardiology appointment in Clarksville at 9 a.m. I drove to the gate at 6:30 this morning and it was locked. I don't know about a detour. I don't know what's happening. Her voice was steady but thin, the voice of someone working hard at calm. Ms. Fontaine, I kept my voice even. The road is my private property. It has been since 1947. The Harmons Bluff HOA held a licensed use agreement for your community's access to this road for 43 years. That license expired in January 2022 when your HOA president chose not to renew it. For 3 years, your community has been using my road without a valid license. Last week, the HOA destroyed the road surface and installed signage claiming it as community property. A silence. I closed the gate this morning to enforce my property rights. I'm sorry for the inconvenience this causes you personally. The detour route is the fire access road on the south boundary of the development. It connects to Route 41 in approximately 4.2 miles. It is passable by standard vehicles. Another silence. When she spoke again, her voice had changed. Not angry at me, but recalibrating in real time, placing the source of the problem correctly. She didn't tell anyone. Karen didn't tell anyone that the road license had lapsed. To my knowledge, no. She's been telling the community for 3 years she was handling the road access situation. I'm aware of that. Mr. Cole, a pause. I'm sorry for all of it, for the road, for what she did to your property. Ms. Fontaine, please drive carefully on the fire access road, and I'd suggest you ask your HOA president at the earliest opportunity why she let a 30-year license agreement expire without telling anyone. She thanked me and hung up. The second call was a man named Dennis Cho, who was less steady than Cheryl Fontaine and more representative of the general register of the morning's communications. He wanted to know what gave me the right to lock a road that the whole community uses. I explained the deed. He disputed it. And I told him the Robertson County Register of Deeds was open to the public and the chain of title was a matter of public record. He hung up. The third call was a delivery driver for a regional grocery service who had 3 scheduled deliveries inside Harmons Bluff and couldn't reach any of his contacts at the HOA. I gave him the detour route. By 9 a.m., the Robertson County School District had rerouted the 2 buses serving Harmons Bluff to the fire access road. I'd been in contact with the district transportation office since Monday. I'd called them as soon as the gates went up, gave them the situation plainly, and provided the detour coordinates. They'd been professional about it. Inconvenienced, but professional. Yeah, the fire access road was 4.2 miles of compacted gravel and hardened dirt running along the southern boundary of the development. It had been built in the 1980s as an emergency vehicle corridor and was maintained by Robertson County at minimal standard, passable in dry conditions, problematic in heavy rain, not designed for daily residential traffic volume. It was also, at its narrowest point, 11 feet wide. Standard residential vehicle, fine. School bus, manageable with care. Moving truck, possible with extreme caution. Semi-trailer delivery vehicle, not possible. By Wednesday afternoon, 3 delivery trucks had turned back from Harmons Bluff. 2 contractors with scheduled work inside the community had called their clients to reschedule. The Amazon logistics driver who serviced the development had flagged it in his route system. And the next day's deliveries were already showing as delayed. The community was not paralyzed, but it was profoundly inconvenienced in ways that compounded with every passing hour, and that every passing hour made more specifically attributable to Karen Voss. The Harmons Bluff Community Facebook group had gone from a place where people posted lost cat notices and discussed upcoming community events to something considerably more pointed. Margaret forwarded me screenshots. I read them once and put my phone face down on the table. The dominant question, appearing in various forms across dozens of posts, was the one that Cheryl Fontaine had asked me on the phone at 6:30 a.m. Why didn't Karen tell anyone the license had lapsed? It was the right question. It was the only question, really. Everything else, the paving project, the invoice, the gate, the detour, was downstream of that single failure of disclosure. Karen had known since January 2022 that the licensed use agreement had not been renewed. She'd received David's certified letters in February and March of 2022, letters she hadn't responded to. She'd sat in HOA board meetings for 3 years and said nothing about it. She'd stood at community gatherings and told her neighbors she was working on acquiring the road permanently, without disclosing that the existing access license had already expired. 99 households had been driving on my road for 3 years without knowing their legal right to do so had lapsed. That was Karen's choice, not mine. She called me at 2:17 p.m. on Wednesday. I was on my porch watching the October light move across the field. But the asphalt surface of my road was visible from where I sat, darker than the surrounding ground, a clean, straight line running toward the locked gate at the east end. "Raymond," her voice was different from Monday's controlled business presentation. The composure was still there. She was not a woman who lost her composure easily, but the foundation under it had shifted. "We need to talk." "We're talking. You can't do this. People live here. 99 families. This is the only practical road into this community. It's a private road. I own it. The license your HOA held to use it expired 3 years ago. You can't just lock a road that an entire community depends on." "I can, Karen. It's my property. The law is clear on this. There is no easement, no recorded right of access, no public road designation. Yet there is only a license agreement that your HOA held for 43 years, that your predecessors renewed every January without fail, and that you chose not to renew in 2022. A pause. The road needed to be upgraded. It was in disrepair. It was my road to maintain as I saw fit. You didn't own it. You had a license to use it. There's a significant legal difference between those two things. We invested $120,000 in that road, without my permission, on my property, after your license had already lapsed, and then you sent me a bill." Silence. "Karen, I want to be precise about something. The gate is not my opening move in a negotiation. The gate is the natural consequence of a license that expired 3 years ago and a paving project that destroyed my private property without authorization. The gate was always available to me. I chose not to exercise that right because I was patient. You mistook my patience for an absence of rights. So what do you want?" "What I've always wanted. What David's demand letter asked for: removal of your signage from my property, restoration of my road to its prior condition or cash equivalent, and a new license agreement, properly executed, annually renewed, with the acknowledgement language that has been in every agreement since 1978. And the gate? Opens when we have a signed license agreement. That could take weeks to negotiate. It could take less than 24 hours if your board is willing to sign the standard agreement David's office has been sending you every December since 1978. I paused. "The language hasn't changed, Karen. It's the same agreement, the same paragraph 4, section B, that you signed in 2018, 2019, and 2020 and 2021. I'd like your signature on the 2025 version. When I have it, and when your HOA has committed to the restoration or cash settlement, the gate opens." Another silence, this one longer. "You're doing this to punish me." I looked at the locked gate at the end of my road. "I'm doing this because you destroyed my property and sent me a bill. I'm doing this because you let a 30-year license agreement expire and told no one. I'm doing this because you put a sign on my grandfather's survey marker claiming it as community property." I kept my voice completely even. "I'm not punishing you, Karen. I'm enforcing a deed that's been recorded in Robertson County since 1947. If it feels like punishment, I'd encourage you to spend some time thinking about whose decisions created this situation." She hung up. At 4:45 p.m. on Wednesday, Margaret texted me again. "Raymond, Karen called an emergency community meeting for tomorrow night, 7 p.m., Community Clubhouse. She's been on the phone all afternoon. Whatever she's planning, people are not happy. Cheryl Fontaine stood up in the Facebook group today and posted the full text of your conversation this morning. It has 67 comments. None of them are defending Karen." I read the text twice. Then I set the phone down and looked at the road. 78 years of clear title. 43 years of annual license agreements. 3 years of Karen Voss deciding that patience and documentation were the same as surrender. The gate was locked. The community was asking questions. And the answers, every one of them, led back to the same address. David pulled the financial records on Thursday. Monday morning, the same day he'd delivered the cease and desist demand, and the HOA's registered agent had complied by Wednesday afternoon, apparently without consulting Karen first. That was the first indication that the board was not unified behind her. The records arrived at David's Nashville office as a thumb drive containing 3 years of budget documents, bank statements, expenditure reports, vendor invoices, and meeting minutes. David's paralegal began the review Wednesday evening. David joined her Thursday morning. He called me at 2 p.m. "Raymond, are you sitting down?" I was standing at my kitchen window. I was watching a red-tailed hawk work the field behind the house. "Go ahead." "The road paving project, $120,847 total, funded entirely from the Capital Improvement Reserve." I assumed. The Capital Improvement Reserve is collected from residents at $1,800 per household per year, specifically designated for community infrastructure, roads, common area maintenance, utility systems, 99 households. That's $178,200 per year going into that fund. And they spent $120,000 of it on a road they didn't own. On a road they didn't own, without a land disturbance permit, without the property owner's permission, and, this is the part I want you to hear carefully, with a vendor arrangement that has some very specific problems. I moved away from the window and sat at the kitchen table. The paving contractor is a company called Voss Premier Paving LLC, registered in Robertson County. David paused. The registered agent for Voss Premier Paving LLC is a man named Daniel Voss, Karen's brother. The kitchen was very quiet. Her brother, younger brother, Daniel Voss, 49, he incorporated Voss Premier Paving in 2021, 4 months before Karen let the license agreement lapse. The company has done 3 projects in Robertson County since incorporation. All 3 were HOA contracts. All 3 were awarded by the Harmons Bluff HOA under Karen's presidency, without competitive bidding. I thought about that timeline. Karen incorporated her brother's paving company in the spring of 2021. She declined to renew the road license in January 2022, and she spent 3 years telling the community she was working on acquiring the road permanently, and then she hired her brother's company to pave it overnight. "There's more," David said. "Tell me." The vendor invoice for the Coles Mill Road project itemizes a line item I want to read to you exactly. Project Management and Site Coordination Services, $14,400. That payment was made by check from the HOA's operating account, separate from the construction contract. The check was not made out to Voss Premier Paving LLC. Who was it made out to? Karen A. Voss. I set down the pen I'd been holding. She paid herself. She paid herself $14,400 from HOA funds as a project management fee on a construction project she authorized, on property she didn't own, using her brother's company, without competitive bidding. David's voice had the quality of a man who'd been doing this for 22 years and still occasionally encountered something that managed to surprise him. It was coded in the accounting as professional services, no board resolution authorizing the payment, no disclosure to the other board members, no disclosure to residents. Did the board know? Based on the meeting minutes, no. The Coles Mill Road project was presented to the board as a single line item. Capital Improvement Project, Road Resurfacing, $120,847, Vendor Voss Premier Paving. The $14,400 management fee payment doesn't appear in the meeting minutes at all. I was quiet for a moment, working through the arithmetic. What else? 2 weeks before the Coles Mill Road project began, Voss Premier Paving performed a driveway resurfacing at 8 Harmons Bluff Circle. Karen's address? Karen's address. The invoice is $8,200 for driveway removal, base prep, and asphalt resurfacing, paid from the HOA's operating account, coded as... He paused, and I could hear the specific restraint of an attorney who'd learned not to editorialize in initial briefings but was finding it difficult. Coded as access road maintenance. She had her own driveway repaved with community funds. 2 weeks before the community's road project, by her brother's company, coded as road maintenance. He paused. Raymond, that's $22,600 in HOA funds spent on or directly benefiting Karen Voss through the road project alone. But there's a third element. Go ahead. I ran the meeting minutes against the board's authorized actions for the past 3 years. In the 2024 budget cycle, there's a reference to ongoing discussions with Meridian Residential Partners regarding community development options. One line, no elaboration. I pulled Meridian Residential Partners from the Tennessee Secretary of State. They're a mid-size residential developer out of Brentwood, active in Robertson and Sumner counties. What's the connection to Karen? I called a contact at the county planning office. Meridian Residential Partners filed a preliminary development inquiry in March 2024 regarding a 14-acre parcel in the Harmon's Bluff Common areas, the open field on the north side of the development. An inquiry was filed in Karen's name as community representative. I stood up from the table. She was trying to sell common area land to a developer. Without board authorization, without community vote, without any recorded authority to act as the HOA's representative in a land transaction. The inquiry went nowhere. Meridian apparently had concerns about the approval process, but not before Karen had been paid a $22,000 consulting fee by Meridian Residential Partners for her services in facilitating the inquiry. I walked to the window. She was selling land she didn't own to a developer, collecting a consulting fee and never disclosing any of it to her board or the community. Correct. David, I kept my voice even. Added up. $14,400 project management fee from HOA funds paid to herself. A $8,200 driveway resurfacing from HOA funds coded as road maintenance. $22,000 consulting fee from Meridian Residential, undisclosed. Total direct financial benefit to Karen Voss from undisclosed arrangements, $44,600. Not $36,400 as I'd initially estimated. Worse. And the community funded $120,000 of it through the Capital Improvement Reserve, of which $120,847 went to her brother's company. I looked at the locked gate at the end of my road. File with the AG. Tennessee AG Consumer Protection Division. I'm doing it today. He paused. Raymond, I want to flag something. The Meridian consulting fee. That's not just an HOA matter. That's a real estate agent receiving undisclosed compensation in connection with a property transaction involving property she was purporting to represent. Initially, Karen holds a Tennessee real estate license, the Real Estate Commission. I'll copy them on the filing. Do it. David filed the AG complaint on Thursday afternoon, the same day the community meeting was scheduled at the Harmon's Bluff Clubhouse. I didn't attend the meeting. I hadn't been invited and didn't need to be there. But Margaret went, and she texted me updates from the parking lot when the signal was good enough. The meeting opened with Karen presenting what she'd apparently framed as the road dispute situation, a property disagreement with a neighbor being handled through the proper legal channels, expected to be resolved shortly. Tom Brierly had let her finish. Then he'd asked her, in front of the full community, to explain the $14,400 management fee payment. You have Margaret's text at 7:43 p.m. Tom Brierly just asked Karen about a $14,400 payment made out to her personally from HOA funds. Karen's face went white. Half the room is standing up. 7:51 p.m. Karen says the management fee was standard practice for complex projects. Tom asked her to show him the board resolution authorizing it. She can't. 8:02 p.m. Someone in the back just asked about Voss Premier Paving and whether Daniel Voss is Karen's brother. Karen is saying that the competitive bidding process was appropriately waived. Tom is asking who authorized the waiver. 8:14 p.m. Board member Linda Marsh just stood up and said she had no knowledge of the management fee, no knowledge that the paving vendor was Karen's brother's company, and no knowledge of any Meridian developer discussions. She said she's calling David Park's office tomorrow morning, second board member nodding next to her. 8:19 p.m. Karen just tried to redirect to the gate. Someone in the front row said, "The gate is your fault, Karen." Room agreed. 8:31 p.m. Meeting over. Karen left through the side door. Tom Brierly stayed and talked to residents for 45 minutes. Tom Brierly called David's office Friday morning. Linda Marsh called 20 minutes later. A third board member, James Culpepper, called that afternoon. 3 of the 5 board members wanted to cooperate with the investigation. They had no knowledge of the management fee, no knowledge of the vendor relationship, no knowledge of the Meridian consulting arrangement. And they'd voted for the road project based on Karen's representation that it was a standard capital improvement with a vetted contractor. They hadn't known the contractor was her brother. They hadn't known she'd paid herself. David took all 3 calls. The 2 remaining board members, both of whom had served since Karen's first term in 2017 and had, in the financial records, approved several of the relevant expenditures, did not call. The board had fractured exactly as financial exposure usually fractured boards, along the line between those who'd known and those who hadn't. On Friday evening, I was sitting on my porch when Margaret called instead of texting. "Raymond, I want to tell you something." "Go ahead." "When Karen paved that road, most of us assumed it was a good thing. An upgrade, better surface, nicer entrance." Ed explained the license agreement. "She never explained the license agreement. She never explained that we were using your property by permission." She paused. "We thought the road was ours." "I know." "She let us believe that. For 3 years, she let 99 families believe that road was community property, while she let the license lapse and hired her brother's company and paid herself from our reserve fund." Another pause. "How much is in the capital improvement reserve right now?" David pulled the current balance from the bank records, $87,000. A silence. "That's 3 years of $178,000 in annual contributions. There should be over $500,000 in that fund." "Yes," I said. There should be." Margaret was quiet for a long moment. "Where did it go?" "That," I said, "is what the AG is going to find out." The building department complaint went in on Friday morning. David filed it simultaneously with a supplemental notice to the Robertson County Sheriff's Department documenting the criminal trespass, the overnight construction on private property without authorization. 2 separate filings, 2 separate agencies, the same underlying set of facts. Robertson County Building and Codes had already confirmed in response to David's earlier records request that no land disturbance permit had been issued for any construction activity at the Coles Mill Road address. That confirmation was now Exhibit A in the building department complaint. The complaint itself was straightforward. A licensed contractor, Voss Premier Paving LLC, had performed land disturbance and paving work on private property without a permit, without the property owner's authorization, and without any recorded easement or construction agreement entitling them to work on that land. The work had altered the surface grade, changed the drainage configuration, and permanently destroyed the existing road surface across 1.2 miles of private property. Robertson County Code requires a land disturbance permit for any grading, excavation, or paving affecting more than 10,000 square feet. Coles Mill Road was approximately 31,000 square feet of surface area. The violation was not technical. It was not a paperwork oversight. It was a complete absence of the most fundamental authorization required before a contractor touches someone else's land. The county inspector arrived at the site on Monday. He walked the full 1.2 miles. He photographed the asphalt surface, the curbing, the drainage modifications. He reviewed the survey markers at both ends, including the survey marker where the HOA sign was still posted in violation of the cease and desist order, which David had now incorporated into the contempt motion before Judge Monroe. The inspector's report was filed Tuesday morning. 2 citations. The first was issued to Voss Premier Paving LLC, unpermitted land disturbance work on private property, Class C violation under Robertson County Code. It was civil penalty of $8,400 plus mandatory stop work order. The second was issued to the Harmons Bluff Community Association, authorizing and funding unpermitted construction on private property not owned by the association, Class C violation, civil penalty of $8,400. Both citations included the same mandatory order. The unpermitted improvements must be removed or the property restored to its pre-construction condition within 90 days, or the citations would be elevated to Class A violations with daily accruing penalties. The county, in other words, was now ordering the HOA to do what David's demand letter had asked them to do 6 weeks earlier: remove the asphalt, restore my road. David called me Tuesday afternoon with the citation details. "The county order gives us something important in the civil suit," he said. "It's an official governmental finding that the construction was unauthorized and must be remediated. That eliminates any argument Karen might make that the paving was a good faith community improvement. The county has now formally declared it an unpermitted trespass. Does it accelerate the timeline? It makes the summary judgment motion stronger. We can argue that the county's finding, combined with the deed documentation and the license lapse, leaves no genuine issue of material fact. There's nothing for a jury to decide. The facts are established and uncontested. When do you file the civil suit? Thursday. I want the county citations in hand and recorded before we file so we can reference them in the complaint. David filed in Robertson County Circuit Court on Thursday, October 30th. The complaint was 41 pages. 4 counts. Count 1. Criminal trespass and destruction of private property. The HOA, acting through Karen Voss as president, had authorized a contractor to perform construction work on Raymond Cole's private property without his knowledge, authorization, or consent. The construction had destroyed the existing road surface, a gravel and limestone road built by Raymond's grandfather in 1947 and maintained by the Cole family for 78 years. Replacement value of the destroyed surface and restoration cost, $120,000. Count 2. 3 years of unlicensed use. The HOA's licensed use agreement had expired January 2022. From January 2022 through October 2025, 99 households had used Raymond Cole's private road without a valid license. The standard annual license fee was $1,200. And 3 years and 10 months of unlicensed use at the prorated license fee, $4,600. David had rounded up slightly from my original estimate to account for the partial year. Count 3. Punitive damages for willful and wanton destruction of private property. This was the count that would get Karen's attention. Tennessee law allows punitive damages when a defendant acts intentionally, fraudulently, maliciously, or recklessly. The complaint documented the full pattern. Karen had let the license lapse deliberately, had incorporated her brother's paving company 4 months before the lapse, had spent 3 years representing to the community that she was acquiring the road while taking no legal steps to do so, had authorized an overnight construction project specifically designed to present the property owner with a fait accompli, and it had sent the property owner a $47,000 invoice for the cost of destroying his own road. That was not negligence. That was not a mistake. That was a calculated sequence of decisions made with full knowledge that the road was private property. Punitive damages requested, $240,000. Count 4. Attorney fees and costs under Tennessee's private property protection statutes. Total demand, $364,600 plus attorney fees and costs. Karen's response was filed 3 weeks later by a new attorney. Frank Hartley had withdrawn from representation the week after the AG complaint was filed. His letter to Karen, which I was told about secondhand, had apparently been direct. The financial fraud exposure made his continued representation as HOA General Counsel a conflict, and the criminal trespass matter was outside his practice area regardless. Karen's new attorney was a litigator named Preston Cole, no relation to me, a coincidence that David found mildly amusing, out of Nashville. Preston Cole had a reputation for aggressive HOA defense. He filed a motion to dismiss all 4 counts and a counterclaim in the same document. The counterclaim had 3 theories. Public necessity. Coles Mill Road was the primary access route for 99 households and constituted an essential community access corridor. Tennessee courts had recognized that private property rights could be limited by public necessity doctrine in cases of community access. Implied easement by prior use. The community had used Coles Mill Road continuously since 1978. 47 years of uninterrupted use established an implied easement by necessity and prior use. An unjust enrichment. Raymond Cole had benefited from the HOA's $120,000 improvement to his road without compensation, and forcing the HOA to restore the road to its prior condition would result in unjust enrichment to the property owner. David read me the counterclaim over the phone. I waited until he'd finished. The implied easement theory. He filed that knowing about the license agreements. He filed it knowing about the license agreements, David confirmed, which tells me one of 2 things. Either Preston Cole hasn't fully reviewed the license agreement language, or he reviewed it and filed anyway because he needs something in the counterclaim to generate delay. What's your read? I think he reviewed it. I think he knows it's going to be dismissed. I think he's buying time while Karen deals with the AG investigation. How long does the motion practice take? Judge Monroe is efficient. We'll have a hearing date within 6 weeks. The hearing was set for December 9th. Judge Patricia Monroe had been on the Robertson County Circuit Court bench for 14 years. David had appeared before her a dozen times and described her consistently with two words: thorough and impatient. Thorough with facts, impatient with legal arguments that substituted theory for documentation. Preston Cole presented the counterclaim theories for 20 minutes. He was a skilled litigator, organized, confident, good on his feet. He made the public necessity argument with genuine conviction, while citing Tennessee case law on community access rights and the court's equitable power to balance private property enforcement against community harm. Judge Monroe let him finish. Then she opened the case file. Mr. Cole, your client's HOA filed implied easement by prior use as a counterclaim theory. I've reviewed the license agreements submitted by the plaintiff. There are 43 of them, running from 1978 through 2021. Each one contains language that I want to read into the record. She read paragraph 4, section B. The courtroom was quiet. Your HOA signed that language 43 times. The defendant personally signed it 4 times. She set the document down. An implied easement by prior use requires that the use be adverse, meaning hostile, under a claim of right, without the owner's permission. How does your client claim adverse use when she personally signed 4 times a document explicitly acknowledging the plaintiff's ownership and waiving any claim of right? Preston Cole: Your Honor, the license agreement language was boilerplate. It doesn't reflect the party's actual understanding of the road's status. The party's actual understanding is reflected in the document they signed. Both parties are sophisticated adults. Your client is a licensed real estate agent. She signed a document that said, in plain English, that her HOA's use of this road created no easement and no permanent right of access. Judge Monroe's voice had the particular quality of a judge who has decided and is now documenting. Mr. Cole, you cannot claim implied easement on property you explicitly acknowledged was private through 43 years of signed license renewals. That's not a close question. The public necessity argument survived slightly longer. Preston Cole had better case law on his side. Tennessee courts had, in limited circumstances, found public necessity to justify limitations on private property enforcement. Judge Monroe reviewed the cases he cited. Then she reviewed the facts. The cases your client relies on involve genuinely landlocked communities with no alternative access. The record before me shows that Harmon's Bluff has an alternative access route, the fire access road on the south boundary. It is less convenient. It is not absent. She paused. Public necessity doctrine is not a remedy for inconvenience. It is a remedy for impossibility. The unjust enrichment theory, dismissed in 4 sentences. Raymond Cole had not requested or accepted the HOA's improvements to his road. Unsolicited improvements to private property performed without the owner's consent do not create an unjust enrichment claim against the owner. The counterclaim was dismissed in its entirety. On the same day, December 9th, the Tennessee Real Estate Commission notified Karen Voss that her real estate license was suspended pending the outcome of the AG investigation. The notification cited 2 grounds. First, the AG's investigation into HOA financial fraud, which implicated Karen's handling of funds in her capacity as a community fiduciary. Second, yet the undisclosed $22,000 consulting fee from Meridian Residential Partners, a payment received in connection with a proposed property transaction involving property Karen was purporting to represent without disclosure to the parties or to the commission. Under Tennessee real estate law, a licensee who receives undisclosed compensation in connection with a property transaction is subject to license suspension or revocation. Karen's license was suspended effective December 9th, 2025. David called me that evening. Counterclaim dismissed, license suspended, AG investigation active, county citations outstanding. He paused. Raymond, we haven't even gotten to summary judgment yet. How's the Capital Improvement Reserve investigation going? The AG's forensic accountant is working through 3 years of bank records. The current reserve balance is $87,000. Based on the contribution history, there should be approximately $534,000 in that fund. I did the math. I'd done it before, but it was worth saying out loud. $447,000 is missing. That's the working figure. The investigation is ongoing. Some of it may be traceable to legitimate expenditures that were improperly coded, but even accounting for that, the gap is significant. I looked out at the road. The gate was still locked. It had been locked for 6 weeks. The community was using the fire access road, a 4.2-mile detour that had, in 6 weeks, become familiar if not comfortable. And Karen Voss had paved my road in October, believing that a retired engineer on 47 acres in rural Tennessee would look at the situation and conclude that accepting it was easier than fighting it. She'd had her counterclaim dismissed, her real estate license suspended, her brother's company cited for unpermitted construction, her HOA cited alongside it, the AG investigating her reserve fund, and the gate was still locked. She hadn't signed the license agreement. Until she did, the gate would stay exactly where it was. The civil judgment came down on February 3rd. Judge Monroe had granted summary judgment on all 4 counts in January. The motion practice had been exactly as David predicted, efficient and decisive. Preston Cole had filed 2 additional motions after the December hearing, both aimed at creating delay rather than resolving the underlying facts. Both were denied. By the time summary judgment was argued in mid-January, the record was so thoroughly documented that the hearing lasted 40 minutes. David called me from the courthouse parking lot. Summary judgment granted, all 4 counts. Judge Monroe is entering the full judgment amount. I was sitting at my kitchen table with coffee and the Robertson County deed abstract, a habit I'd developed over 30 years of property work, reviewing the chain occasionally the way some people reread a book they love. Not because anything had changed, because it was good to remember what you held and how you came to hold it. What's the number? Full damages on count 1. $120,000 for destruction of private property. Count 2. $4,600 unlicensed use. Count 3. Punitive damages. He paused. Raymond, she awarded the full $240,000 on punitives. I set down the coffee. Full amount. She wrote 3 paragraphs on the punitive damages finding. I want to read you the closing one. I heard paper. The evidence establishes that the defendant did not destroy the plaintiff's road through negligence, mistake, or misunderstanding of property rights. The defendant is a licensed real estate professional who personally signed 4 separate documents explicitly acknowledging the plaintiff's ownership of Coles Mill Road and waiving any claim of right. The defendant subsequently incorporated a paving company through a family member, allowed the HOA's licensed use agreement to lapse without disclosure to the board or community, represented to that community for 3 years that she was acquiring the road while taking no legal steps to do so, authorized overnight construction designed to present the property owner with a fait accompli, and invoiced the property owner for the cost of destroying his own road. This conduct was not impulsive. It was calculated, sustained over 3 years, and executed with deliberate disregard for the plaintiff's documented property rights. Punitive damages are not only appropriate, they are necessary to reflect the severity and duration of the willful conduct. The kitchen was very quiet. 3 paragraphs, I said. She wanted it in the record. Count 4. Attorney fees and costs, $18,200. Total judgment, $382,800. More than the original demand. The attorney fees had pushed it past the $364,600 figure David had filed. The judgment was entered against 2 defendants, the Harmon's Bluff Community Association and Karen A. Voss personally. The HOA's reserves, what remained of them after 3 years of Karen's management, were seized within 48 hours of the judgment being recorded. Current balance, $61,000. Against a judgment of $382,800, the gap was $321,800. That gap ran against Karen personally. She had a house, a car, and a suspended real estate license. She did not have $321,800. She did not have anything close to it. What she had was a civil judgment she couldn't satisfy, an AG investigation into $447,000 in missing capital improvement reserve funds, and 2 counts of fraud plus 1 count of breach of fiduciary duty that the Robertson County grand jury had returned in late January. That the indictment had come down quietly, a single paragraph in the Robertson County legal notices, which Margaret had texted me the morning it appeared. Raymond, saw the indictment in the paper this morning, 2 counts criminal fraud, 1 breach of fiduciary duty. Thought you should know before you heard it elsewhere. I'd read the text, put the phone down, and gone back to what I was doing. It wasn't satisfaction exactly. Satisfaction implies the outcome was the goal. The outcome was a consequence, the natural downstream result of what Karen had done and the legal machinery that processes what people do. My goal had been the road. The road was mine. That had been true on the morning Karen sent her contractor overnight. It was true now. The litigation had not changed the ownership. It had clarified it, enforced it, and imposed the costs of ignoring it on the person who'd chosen to ignore it. The new license agreement was signed on February 12th. Tom Brierly had been elected interim HOA president at a community vote in November, a vote that had been called by the 3 cooperating board members after Karen's real estate license suspension and had returned a result of 94-5 in favor of new leadership. The 5 dissenting votes were, Margaret told me, the 2 remaining Karen-aligned board members and 3 households that hadn't fully followed the story. Tom had called David's office the morning after his election. "I want to talk about the road," David had called me. My position was simple. I'd always been willing to offer a fair license agreement. The standard terms my family had offered every year since 1978 were still available. But given the 3 years of unlicensed use and the destruction of my road surface, I wanted 2 modifications. First, the annual fee would increase from $1,200 to $3,600, reflecting current market rate for private road access in Robertson County, as established by 2 comparable agreements David had pulled from county records. Second, the agreement would be structured not as an annual renewable license, but as a recorded long-term easement, a 25-year term, title insured, with renewal rights and a capped escalation formula. Not because I wanted to bind future owners of my property to terms they hadn't chosen, but because 99 families deserved road access that didn't depend on an annual renewal that a future HOA president could quietly allow to lapse. Yet Tom had reviewed the terms with a property attorney the community had retained independently, not Frank Hartley, not Preston Cole, a real estate specialist out of Clarksville who'd reviewed the agreement with fresh eyes and reported to the board that the terms were fair. The board voted 5-0 to approve. The agreement was signed February 12th, recorded with the Robertson County Register of Deeds on February 14th, and title insured through a Nashville title company by February 19th. I opened the gates that morning, both of them. East End and West End swung back on their hinges and locked open with the gate stops Cal Briggs had installed specifically for the purpose. The padlocks came off, the crossbars went up. Cole's Mill Road was open. My son drove down from Nashville that weekend. Daniel Cole was 31, worked in commercial finance, and had his mother's patience and my tendency towards silence in large groups and long conversations when something needed to be said. He'd followed the situation from October onward. I'd kept him informed, not because I needed his counsel, but because the road had been his grandfather's and his great-grandfather's before that, and he had a right to know what was happening to it. He arrived Saturday morning and we walked the road together. The asphalt surface was still there. Removal was a separate process, part of the county remediation order that the new HOA board was working through with a contractor. The HOA signage was gone, pulled down the same week the cease and desist contempt order had been enforced in November. My grandfather's survey marker, the granite post, 4 inches square and 18 inches tall, as set in 1947, was visible at the east entrance, exactly where it had always been. We walked to it and stood there for a moment. The morning was cold. February in Tennessee with a thin overcast and the particular stillness of farmland in winter, everything stripped back to its basic forms. Bare trees, brown fields, the long, straight line of the road running west toward the development. Daniel looked at the survey marker, then at the road. "Dad," he turned to me. "Was it worth it? Closing the gate. 99 families couldn't get out for 4 months." I'd been waiting for the question. Not from Daniel specifically, from anyone who'd followed the story and arrived at the same reasonable place a reasonable person arrives. The gate had caused real hardship for people who hadn't caused real harm. "The gate was never the point," I said. "Oh, then what was the point?" "The point was that Karen Voss destroyed my road, sent me a bill, and assumed I'd pay it." I looked at the survey marker, my grandfather's granite post, unchanged since 1947. The gate was a question, the only question I had. Whether Karen Voss, given the full consequences of her choices made visible, would acknowledge that this road belonged to my family and sign an agreement saying so. And her answer told you what? Her answer told me she wouldn't. Not without the gate. Not without the judgment. Not without the indictment. I paused. Some people will respect a deed because it's right. Some people will respect a deed because the cost of not respecting it becomes undeniable. Karen was the second kind. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Did she ever, at any point, just acknowledge it? Had the ownership? She signed the license agreement 4 times, 2018, 2019, 2020, 2021. 4 times she put her name on a document that said, "This road belonged to my family." I looked west down the road. She knew. She'd always known. She just decided that if she acted like it wasn't true for long enough, it would stop being true. That's not how deeds work. No, I said, it isn't. We stood at the survey marker for another minute. Did she? Daniel asked. Did she what? Eventually respect it. I looked at the granite post my grandfather had set 78 years ago, the road my family had built, the 47 acres that had passed from hand to hand through 3 generations without a gap in the chain, without a cloud on the title, without a single year when it had been anything other than exactly what the deed said it was. Eventually, I said. We walked back to the house. The civil judgment of $382,800 remained partially unsatisfied. The HOA's $61,000 in seized reserves had been applied. Karen's personal assets, her house, her vehicle, her remaining financial accounts, were subject to collection proceedings. Her house had been listed for sale in late February. The AG's investigation into the missing capital improvement reserves was ongoing. The working figure was $447,000 unaccounted for across 3 years. The forensic accountant had traced approximately $180,000 to documented but improperly authorized expenditures. The remaining $267,000 was still being traced. The criminal trial was set for September. Now, Tom Brierley's board had filed a separate civil suit against Karen and the 2 remaining allied board members for breach of fiduciary duty, the community's own action, independent of mine, seeking recovery of the misappropriated reserve funds on behalf of the 99 households whose money had been taken. The remediation contractor was scheduled to begin road restoration in April. Weather permitting, the asphalt would come out, the limestone base would be restored, and Coles Mill Road would look the way it had looked for 78 years before Karen Voss sent her crew overnight in October. My grandfather had built this road with his own hands in 1947. He'd built it to serve his land, to connect his property to the county highway, to make the 47 acres he'd purchased workable and accessible. Yet he'd been generous with it. He'd offered it to the development in 1978 at a fair price, had maintained the agreement honestly for 33 years before my father inherited it, and I inherited it from him. The deed had always been clear. Karen Voss had spent 3 years deciding that clarity was negotiable. She'd found out that 78 years of recorded title is not something you negotiate away overnight with 3 pieces of heavy equipment and a prefabricated sign. The gate was open. The road was mine. The survey marker was exactly where my grandfather had put it. Nothing about any of that had ever changed.